let's go to Bakkt. Now, Bakkt, for those in the know, was a much ballyhooed project owned by, I think it was the New York Stock Exchange parent company, ICE, and it launched sort of at a bad time. They launched with this vision of being a digital, sort of a wallet for digital assets, broadly defined, right? So both cryptocurrencies, but digital assets such as airline points, rewards points to Starbucks and other retailers. And they had this vision with this app that they could be sort of a digital asset investing app that involved all of those things and made, say Starbucks rewards points fungible with airline mileage or even crypto assets. So anyway, they launched this thing 2 years ago. It didn't seem to take off that well. And now after 2 years, they're pulling the plug and they're focusing more on some of their B2B rather than B2C applications that they have within their product suite. So just wanted to talk about Bakkt, sort of pulling back from the consumer-facing stuff and changing things up again in the evolution of this company. I'm going to toss it straight to Wendy for her thoughts on this one.
Really quick, I was going through my YouTube channel, kind of like recategorizing things, and I just remember seeing all these titles from about 2 years ago. The Bakkt pump is coming. It's going to get us out of the bear market, et cetera. And that was the sentiment that we had during that time, as we were like super excited about institutions coming in, all of those things. And it's just really interesting to see that they're actually discontinuing their consumer app after the 2-year period. And I can kind of understand why. We're seeing a lot of regulators come into the space and be a little bit aggressive. So it probably makes sense for them from a business perspective, but how fast things change. Well, I'd love to get your take on this.
Yeah, this is a fun story just to look back on. It kind of dates everybody because it's not that old, but if you were pay attention to the Bakkt beat, which was definitely a thing back in 2019, 2020, then the story is interesting to you. Like, there's a lot of names here, including like Kelly LaFleur, who is a former CEO and was a senator for a little bit. She had like a little stint with Bakkt. And then the Intercontinental Exchange, as Zach mentioned, was with this. And then they went into a SPAC process. They tried to do like this Starbucks reward app that had like this crypto thing. It had like the airlines mile thing. None of it really panned out. And that happened with a lot of these firms, right? In 2019, 2020, they're trying to get product market fit. And they didn't quite get there, even with the Bitcoin pump. And now they're starting to break off and shed some of their products. It's funny just looking at some of the other unexpected heroes of the last 2 years who did really well. Typically, we weren't talking about them during the last bear market. So it's odd to like think back and be like, oh, this team did well, and I thought they might do okay. Then this team did terrible, and I thought they were going to be the superstars. But that's just sort of how the crypto markets pick and choose winners and losers. For Bakkt itself, I think you're totally on point there, Wendy. There's not a lot there for retail right now. Like, no one cares about the space. No one's really going to be paying attention to it. Not a lot of people are buying unless they have a lot of conviction. Right now, it's institutions. I know we always beat the institutions drum, but it really isn't institutions, right? They're not necessarily going to be the same ones. Maybe it's some people with small exposure, but what we're really seeing is people are going to buy into the space with deep pockets. I think retail is scared for a little bit, and that's why we didn't see anything with the Super Bowl this year, right? Why sell to retail? They don't care right now. Christy, throw it over to you.
Actually, a lot of what I was going to say, Will, you just said, but I think that also when you look back historically over time, and I'm not talking just about this particular wave, but the last few waves, there was almost always a shift away from retail, or the retail projects that were out there kind of petered out. I've seen over the last 6 years a lot of companies that started with a retail focus, a consumer focus, shift to business. There were tax platforms, for example, that would help you with your crypto taxes that ended up just being like, yeah, we're not actually going to work with individuals. We're going to work more with companies now. And I think that that's what you see when adoption on a personal level is just not happening in the way that companies were hoping. And when your business model is this is going to spur adoption, then you're going to have to shift at some point, because during a bear market, the adoption rate just isn't where people wanted it to be, and that's a hard model to maintain. So that's kind of my old lady been here, done that perspective. Zach.
Yeah, I was having a conversation about this a couple days ago. I think there is like something to be said for sort of, Trojan horsing your way to mass adoption through these big companies, right? If you can make the case to these big companies that there's some operating efficiencies or other cool things that blockchain technology can do, this like basically this database system can do for them that makes it, again, cheaper to operate as they would normally, or potentially, bring added benefits to their consumer base, you can kind of get to that 100 million users or that vaunted, 1 billion users a bit more quickly than doing sort of the more, consumer facing targeted standalone things. And I think that is sort of like an interesting sort of version of what that adoption story could look like, right? In Bakkt's case, right, it's working with one of its businesses that it acquired not long ago to get some of that back-end software into some firms that might be using crypto in a way that would make sense for them. So there is a way, I think, that like adoption could be fueled again through these enterprise use cases, which also like is PTSD word in terms of like last cycle and what enterprise use cases meant. But I think there is a compelling way to say, okay, here's the business case for why, you Visa or you MasterCard really want to do crypto stuff, especially around like sort of payments. I think that might be the place where that mainstream adoption thing actually ends up happening. But Christy, I saw your hand. Definitely want to throw it your way.
Yeah, the other thing that I think might come into play is also where the regulations are going to go and how it's going to be affecting different companies versus KYC on an individual level. That is really hard to chase and track. Whereas if you're just working with a few larger companies, the regulation side of thing gets a little more, hopefully. That's where the regulation side is probably going to have the most clarity in the near term. So it might just be even a matter of logistics. It's just a lot easier to deal with the business side than to deal with the retail side and having to worry about what you are exchanging or trading or holding. Will?
Yeah, last on this is I want to pull in what's happening with Gemini right now, because I think there's some linkage here with the retail users, right? Gemini had about 300,000 people in its earn account. And that's what really retail wants, is like sustainable yield in some sort of way. They want to get a little bit more interest. They want to have their toes in the water. They don't want to jump headfirst in like everyone else. So they just want a little exposure. Same time, it's really risky to be on that edge still, because a lot of these applications are just being finished in product, right? Like they're just throwing it out there. They don't really know what's going to happen. And that's why Gemini earned customers are in this situation, right? They had exposure to the wrong pool of bets, and now they're in a bad spot. Bakkt, on the other hand, just wasn't able to get exposure to retail itself. Retail wasn't really interested in what they had to buy, and that's why they saw no adoption. So it's a really hard product to find in crypto to bring retail into the marketplace.